Hi guys, Craig here. So welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today's video is going to be on Dr. Death Harold Shipman. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And without further ado, grab yourself a drink and let's get into the video. Harold Frederick Shipman, sometimes known by his friends as Fred, was born in Nottingham, England on January 14th, 1946. Harold was an English general practitioner, which basically means that he was a registered doctor working in his local surgery treating patients and also sometimes treating them at home. Harold Shipman is widely believed to be the most prolific serial killer in modern day history. On the 31st of January in the year 2000, Harold Shipman was found guilty of murdering 15 of his patients. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without any chance of parole, which ultimately led to him hanging himself one day before his 58th birthday in his jail cell. So now, let me tell you a little bit more about Harold Shipman, his life and his early career as a doctor. Harold Shipman was born on the Eastwood Council estate in Nottingham, England. He was the middle child of Harold Shipman Sr. and his wife Vera. He was born into a working class family and both of his parents were devout Methodists. When he was growing up, Harold absolutely loved to play sport, rugby in particular, and he was even captain of his local youth league. So in 1957, Harold passed his 11 plus exams. 11 plus exams are basically a set of exams designed to get you into an academic secondary grammar school. After this, he moved to High Pavement Grammar School in Nottingham, England, and he remained there until 1964. So Harold was particularly close to his mother Vera. Some people would even go on to say that they were too close. Vera was a very overbearing, dominating mother, but sadly she did suffer from lung cancer. Harold actually overseen all of his mother's care during her illness, and he was particularly intrigued when he seen his mother's pain subside a little bit when a doctor visited the house and administered her with morphine. But sadly, not long after Harold's 17th birthday, his mother Vera would lose her battle with cancer and sadly die. While studying to become a doctor, Harold would meet a girl called Primrose, and on the 5th of November 1966, the pair got married, and they would go on to have 4 children. Harold would actually fail on his first attempt to get into medical school, but on his second try he did get into the Leeds School of Medicine, and he graduated from there in 1970. And in 1974, Harold took his first job as a general practitioner at the Abraham Medical Centre. But it was actually around this time that Harold started to get addicted to the drug pethidine. Pethidine is a synthetic opioid pain relief. It is noted that his work colleagues started to notice his strange behaviour and they did think that he was acting differently. But it was noted by some of his colleagues that doctors in the surgery thought that he may be suffering from epilepsy. Later that year, due to his drug addiction, Harold's veins would actually collapse. And his drug abuse got so bad that at one point his wife Primrose had to drive him around to do all of his home visits, as he was incapable of doing this himself. Some believe at this point is when his addictive behaviour started to get out of control. Harold was actually getting hold of the pethidine by over-prescribing it to his patients, so he would prescribe them more than they actually needed and keep the excess for himself. But the following year, Harold was actually caught for forging prescriptions. He was fined £600, charged, and made to attend drug rehabilitation. But it's important to note that Dr. Harold Shipman at this point was not struck off and was allowed to continue practicing medicine. Then in 1977, to get a fresh start, Harold took a job at the Donnybrook Medical Centre in Hyde, near Manchester, England. He continued to work there all throughout the 1980s. It's also important to note that they knew nothing about Harold's past. They didn't know about his drug addiction, they didn't know about his charges for forging prescriptions, because in the 1980s, you just didn't have to disclose these things. So Harold worked in the Donnybrook Medical Centre for a long time, and he was known by the locals as a pretty good doctor. He was also known to be very generous, so if you needed any kind of pills, Dr. Harold Shipman was your man. It must be said that even though he was popular with the locals, his work colleagues didn't quite feel the same. They found him very arrogant and very abrupt at times. After a long stint at the Donnybrook Medical Centre, Dr. Harold Shipman decided to open his own practice, just across the street at 21 Market Street. And as he was such a popular doctor, many of his patients decided to move with him. Dr. Harold Shipman was held in such high regards that he was even interviewed for a TV documentary on how the mentally ill should be treated. But then in March 1998, Dr. Linda Reynolds of the Donnybrook Medical Centre started to note some concerns about the high death rate in Dr. Harold Shipman's patients. Dr. Harold Shipman's death rate was 10 times higher than any other doctor in the area. Harold had logged 551 deaths, and the other 10 doctors in the area had only logged 1,126 deaths combined. She also found it pretty strange that the majority of the deaths occurred were elderly women, and that they all lived alone and were found dead, sitting upright in their armchairs, fully dressed. In fact, all of these women seemed to be, from what she could see, in pretty good health. She would ultimately report this to the police, but on April 17th, the case was closed due to there not being enough evidence. Later, at the Shipman inquiry, this would be blamed on inexperienced police officers, and it is noted that they could have prevented a further 3 deaths at this point. It's also at this point that I should point out that a taxi driver named John Shaw actually reported to the police that he thought Dr. Harold Shipman was murdering his patients. He had no actual proof of this, but he did note that he found it very strange that he would drop patients off at the surgery and they seemed to be in perfect health. But later, under the care of Dr. Harold Shipman, they would be found dead. Dr. Harold Shipman's last victim was 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy. She was found dead on the 24th of June 1998. She was said to be in good health for her age and have no outstanding medical issues. It is believed that Harold Shipman came round to Kathleen's house to carry out some routine blood tests, and then he would become the last person to ever see her alive. Harold would also later go on to sign her death certificate claiming that Kathleen had died of old age. It's at this point that Kathleen's daughter Angela became very concerned when she was contacted by the local solicitor regarding her mother's will. The solicitor actually had some concerns over the will's validity. The will also strangely stated that her children were excluded from the will, despite Angela being extremely close to her mother. She was even more shocked when she found out that the contents of her mother's estate, worth £386,000, was left to one Dr. Harold Shipman. Armed with this information, Angela went to the police, who immediately opened an inquiry due to the suspicious nature of the allegations. And it was during this time that Kathleen's body was exhumed. They then found very high levels of diamorphine in Kathleen's body. Diamorphine is normally used to help cancer victims deal with their pain, but funnily enough, Kathleen didn't have cancer. Police would go on to question Dr. Harold Shipman about this, and it was at this point he tried to convince police officers that Kathleen had a drug addiction. He would also try to prove this by showing police officers entries he had made into his computer to try and support this. But after police searched his computer, it was proven that the entries about Kathleen's drug addiction was made after her death. So on September 7th, Dr. Harold Shipman was arrested. In a search of his home, police discovered an old typewriter, and it was later proved that this was the typewriter used to forge Kathleen Grundy's will. It was at this point that police started investigating other deaths certified by Dr. Harold Shipman. They focused on 15 cases specifically. They started to notice a pattern. Dr. Harold Shipman would arrive at a victim's house, administering them with lethal doses of diamorphine, and then signing their death certificate. It was also proven that he would forge and fake medical documents to make people believe that they were already in poor health. So Dr. Harold Shipman was charged with 15 counts of murder, and the trial began on the 5th of October 1999 at Preston Crown Court. The names of the victims that Harold Shipman stood trial for were Marie West, Irene Turner, Lizzie Adams, Jean Lilly, Ivy Lomas, Muriel Grimshaw, Marie Quinn, Kathleen Wagstaff, Bianca Pomfret, Nora Nuttall, Pamela Hillier, Maureen Ward, Winifred Miller, Joanne Melia, and of course Kathleen Grundy. Harold's legal defence team tried to get the Kathleen Grundy charge tried on its own, due to there being an alleged motive, but this was unsuccessful. So on January the 31st in the year 2000, Dr. Harold Shipman was found guilty of 15 cases of murder, and the jury only had to deliberate for 2 hours. The judge passed the only sentence he could at the time: life imprisonment. He also recommended that Harold Shipman never be released. 10 days after his trial, on the 11th of February, Dr. Harold Shipman was struck off by the JMC. Dr. Harold Shipman always claimed his innocence, and always maintained that scientific evidence was working against him. His wife Primrose always stood by his side as well, claiming that he was innocent, even after she was presented with all the facts at the trial. They do say love is blind. Dr. Harold Shipman is the only doctor in British history known and charged with killing his patients. But then, at 6:20 a.m. on the 13th of January 2004, Dr. Harold Shipman was found dead in his jail cell. He hung himself from the window bars using his own bed sheets. Harold's motive for his suicide was never really established. It is widely thought that he done this to financially secure his wife Primrose after he was stripped of his NHS pension. Although Harold was charged and found guilty with 15 murders, it is actually believed that his death toll could be as high as 250 people. The Dr. Harold Shipman case made people more uncomfortable about the control doctors have over the end of someone's life. People that had previously placed blind faith in the medical community became newly aware of the sheer power of a doctor, who ultimately held the hand of patients as they walked the tightrope between life and death. Okay guys, so that was the story of Dr. Harold Shipman. I really hope that you enjoyed this video. So if you did, please give it a big thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and please share this video. And I will see you all next time. Bye!